Move over Amazon because Google is investing billions in Anthropic as well. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown Brief, all the AI headline news you need in around 5 minutes. Happy Halloween, everyone. Today, we are doing a brief that actually covers yesterday as well. Obviously, yesterday we got the White House executive order on artificial intelligence, which pushed out a lot of the other news, but we are catching up with some fairly big stories, starting with news from the very end of the week last week that Amazon was not the only big tech giant investing in Anthropic. Hot on the heels of that announcement just a few weeks ago, Google has now committed up to $2 billion in funding for Anthropic as well. Now, in the same way that Amazon's $4 billion reported investment is actually $1.25 billion now, with more to come later, Google is investing $500 million upfront right now, with an agreement to invest up to $1.5 billion more over time. Notably, while that was Amazon's first investment into Anthropic, Google had already invested $550 million earlier this year. Now, there is a lot going on here. First of all, it's quite clear that the template of the Microsoft OpenAI deal has been something that has been seized upon. And in many ways, it feels not just like a shift in the scale of corporate investment from big tech incumbents into new startups, but a change in kind as well. The OpenAI and Microsoft deal obviously has very deep integration between these companies. Many parts of the relationship are articulated and played out, including who gets what revenue from how different companies sign up to use OpenAI's services. Indeed, we talked last week about how companies buying access to OpenAI's enterprise services through Microsoft Azure is actually kind of harming their bottom line, as they get paid much less for that than if they go direct to OpenAI. Now, Azure is important for another reason. Another big part of the template for these deals is clearly about competition in the cloud business. That Microsoft OpenAI deal came with a commitment to use Microsoft's Azure cloud to train OpenAI models. And when Amazon and Anthropic announced their investment back at the end of September, cloud was clearly a part of it as well. Anthropic wrote, AWS will become Anthropic's primary cloud provider for mission-critical workloads, providing our team with access to leading compute infrastructure in the form of AWS Trainium and Infertia chips, which will be used in addition to existing solutions for model training and deployment. They also talk about expanding their support of Amazon Bedrock. And so again, this is a comprehensive interaction and relationship, not just an investment, but a deep integration. However, it sounds like they're doing something similar with Google Cloud as well. As part of this investment, the WSJ also writes, quote, Anthropic has also signed a multi-year deal with Google Cloud worth more than $3 billion. That contract was signed a few months before the new investment. Now, combined, this means that Anthropic has raised, or has access to have raised, almost $7 billion in the past year. That's not as much as, but certainly is getting a lot closer to the $10 billion that OpenAI raised from Microsoft. One of the big lines that Anthropic has pitched to investors is that, as again the Wall Street Journal puts it, quote, the leaders of the AI race could be cemented as soon as next year. Now, if you want to understand how big the stakes are for these big tech companies, outside of just the future potential of whatever AI can turn into, there are also very serious share price implications right now. Microsoft soared last week after announcing better than expected performance in its cloud business, while meanwhile shares of Alphabet, which is of course Google's parent company, have fallen more than 10% since their earnings last week, that had their cloud growing less than any time since 2019. It is a fascinating dynamic and wrinkle to this space, how these big tech companies are combining with the startup labs, and it's something that I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about, how this deal with both Google and Amazon at the same time came together. Now, speaking of share prices and speaking of investments in AI, in an interview with the Financial Times, storied venture capitalist Vinod Khosla has said that the excitement and hype around AI will lead inevitably to overvalued startups. Earlier this month, he said that most investments in AI today, venture investments, will lose money. He said that many newer investors are investing because everybody else is investing. Now, by way of comparison, last year, VCs put $5.1 billion into AI companies, whereas this year, they've invested $21.5 billion into AI companies. Now, Khosla is not an AI skeptic. According to the FT, quote, he believes AI has the potential to take on 80% of the workload and 80% of all human roles over the next 2 decades and will create huge economic value. He also, they note, was one of the earliest investors in OpenAI, investing $50 million in 2019 at a startup that valued the company at around $1 billion. Given that the firm is rumored to be raising at around an $86 billion valuation, that stake is obviously now worth a heck of a lot more. Now, speaking of OpenAI and their leading product ChatGPT, over the weekend, people started to notice 2 things. One was a new PDF reading feature, which we'll get into in just a moment, but another was an update called All Tools, where rather than selecting which version of the of the GPT model you want to use, be it Browse with Bing, or DALL-E, or the traditional model. All of them are natively integrated into the default model. So for example, last week, you weren't able to upload a photo into the DALL-E model and ask for a different version of that photo, but you were able to upload a photo into GPT-4 Vision. Now the barrier between those two is totally broken down, and you can upload a picture and then ask for a version of it, modified in whatever way you want to do it. Now, this also integrates web browsing, and it integrates their advanced data analysis, which used to be called Code Interpreter. On the one hand, this feels like what ChatGPT was always supposed to be, but on the other, it is a dramatic upgrade in the user experience. And in that way, it's one of the most profound and clear trends for this fall in artificial intelligence, which is updates to the user experience that make these tools radically more useful and integrated into our workflows as they exist currently. Now, as I mentioned, there was another update as well, which is that OpenAI has officially added native PDF chat. The way they describe it, upload many types of documents, work with PDFs, data files, or any document you want to analyze. Just upload and start asking questions. Now, of course, if you've ever used any of the plugins on ChatGPT, this is one of the most popular features to build around. Indeed, some companies were not just building plugins, but were building entire experiences around this. As Alex Kerr pointed out, many startups just died today because OpenAI added PDF chat. You can also chat with data files and other documents. We had a wave of products better suited as features rather than standalone companies. Wrappers are being squeezed by OpenAI on one side and incumbents on the other. It's a rough world out there. This again has been one of the big themes of the year, that many of our expectations of how the AI startup space was going to play out just haven't come to pass. And in fact, very different forces have tended to favor incumbents and bigger players. We've seen a lot of the companies that are enterprise wrappers on OpenAI also struggle, with Jasper and its set of layoffs serving as example number one. But it's also happening with these smaller sort of feature companies who it turns out were ultimately just building core functionality that OpenAI hadn't gotten around to yet. Now again, this stinks for those startups, many of whom will be forced to pivot or perish, but it is certainly better for the user experience to be able to use this feature natively from within the software itself. I know that as someone who interacts with a lot of PDFs and research papers via ChatGPT, I am quite excited about this one. Lastly today, an interesting little story about emotion detecting AI. I actually love the anecdote that TechCrunch starts its article off with about this as well. They write, in 2019, Amazon upgraded its Alexa assistant with a feature that enabled it to detect when a customer was likely frustrated and respond with proportionally more sympathy. If a customer asked Alexa to play a song and it queued up the wrong one, for example, and then the customer said, "No, Alexa," in an upset tone, Alexa might apologize and request a clarification. Well, the article goes on that a nonprofit called Laion, L-A-I-O-N, which has worked to build image and text datasets for training generative AI, including Stable Diffusion, has just announced what they call the Open Empathetic Project. Said Christopher Schumann, a Laion co-founder, the Laion team with backgrounds in healthcare, education, and machine learning research saw a gap in the open source community. Emotional AI was largely overlooked. Much like our concerns about non-transparent AI monopolies that led to the birth of Laion, we felt a similar urgency here. He continued, with Open Empathetic, our goal is to create an AI that goes beyond understanding just words. We aim for it to grasp the nuances in expressions and tone shifts, making human-AI interactions more authentic and empathetic. So right now, the project is recruiting volunteers to submit and annotate audio clips that it can use to build this database. Said another open source contributor to the project, Carrie Norrie, we're driven by a clear mission to harness the power of AI in ways that can genuinely benefit society. We're passionate about transparency and believe that the best way to shape AI is out in the open. Anyway, super interesting project, one I'm going to be keeping an eye on. But for now, that is going to do it. Next up, the main AI breakdown.